everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 8 of Natsume's Book of Friends, Natsume Yujin-Cho, and eight's my lucky number. Rule of 8. If you don't know my channel very well, I feel like I say it on every single series that 8 is not only my lucky number, but I have this theory that if it's a season or a series it's only 11 to 13 episodes, which I've gotten from my anime list the gist that this first season of Natsume is only 13 episodes, and that's what I'm going off of. That's where I'm basing my hypothesis on, nothing more. But I do think that the 8th episode is always a good one. It's either a turning point towards the final arc of a season or the arc of a series, or at the very least, it's usually a really well-constructed episode. I have yet to be proven wrong. Now, if it's like a 74 episode series like Monster, then the 8th episode is just like a little drop in the bucket. It's not exactly, it's only when you have that 11 to 13 episode season or series. And the reason for that is that it usually follows either a Western or a Japanese literary structure of either 3 acts or 4 acts. If it's a 3-act structure, then your 8th episode is right at the end of the 2nd act, beginning of the 3rd act. So you're setting up your conclusion, your climax. If you're going by a 4-act structure, then it's in that final act. So I don't know. I've yet to be proven wrong. We're just going to go with it, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm really excited, though, to see what happens with this series. The last episode, this series, it tries every time. It gets real close. It's like March Comes In Like a Lion. Both of those series, they're so full of whimsical, wholesome, heartwarming fun and comedy, and then you'll just be going along having a great time, and then suddenly it's like, are you ready to cry? And you're like, no, I wasn't ready. And it just pours on the emotion. So I'm really excited to keep on continuing this series. I've been trying to watch a little bit ahead because of scheduling. So, and that way, because I have some extra hours in the summer, I'm trying to work ahead so that I can have some more free time. So that's kind of what this case is. I don't really have any comments. Most of the comments that I've looked at, because I'm recording ahead, a lot of the things that I want to say about those comments, I end up saying in the later reactions. So it's one of those things where I'm like, I could waste my time typing out this big long thing, or I could be like, you're gonna find out in 2 weeks when I talk about exactly what you're talking about in the comments. So so I'm just gonna leave it at that. I have told my moderators that I'm just at the beginning of this series. I'm at the very, very start. We have like 6 seasons that I know of this series. The 7th season is on its way. We have so many episodes to get through that I told my moderators, I'm like, I'm not really focusing too much on comments that are trying to break down Natsume's character, because I'm only at the beginning. I'm going to be experiencing his character throughout the entire series. So I, one, don't want to be influenced by somebody's comment and then have this perception of him when I could discover it on my own in the series. And 2, a lot of times those comments tend to lead towards spoilers, and I usually want to avoid that. So don't worry. If I'm missing something with Natsume's character, I'm sure I'll discover it along the way. And if by the end of the series I haven't discovered it, then we'll have a live stream to talk about it. We'll be able to talk about it in the comments. But I don't like to get too much into reading character analyses, because those tend to be from people that have watched the entire series. So you have a well-rounded picture of that character, and I don't yet, but I'm going to. I just got to get there. So a lot of times it's basically just be patient with me, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So, but I'm not going to waste any more time. I got off work early today, and I was like, oh, I want to watch Natsume. So I'm glad. Also, apologies. I've been calling him Natsume this whole time because I'm from a ditch, basically. And pronunciation's my worst. And people were like, it's Natsume. And I was like, well, thank you. I'm not from Japan. I don't speak Japanese, so it is good to get a little bit of a kind-hearted pronunciation. Somebody in the comments was like, why is she pronouncing it like that? And I'm like, because I'm not from Japan, you be a little bit more considerate. Don't be rude. Nobody asked you. But there were some very nice people that were like, it's Natsume. And I was like, thank you. There's a nice way to say it. I feel like there's an etiquette to comments, and sometimes people don't know how to comment correctly. And by correctly, I mean kind and considerately. Some people are just rude, and I'm like, why would I read that? So Anyway, I'm all full of it. Let's go ahead and dive in. You all know how this song and dance is probably going to start. We're going to have that 480p starting with Natsume. But we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and give us that sweet, sweet 480p show. You almost got me, show. You almost got me. Oh my gosh. I just think that I'm ready every time I start this episode. Every time I start an episode of Natsume, I'm like, okay, I'm ready. I got this. And then I was doing real good. And then this episode, it did make me shed tears. And I was like, dang it, show. We're only 8 episodes in, so I thought about Whiteboard Coon, but then the only real question about Whiteboard Coon is just the concept of, and I'm gonna be real with y'all. I know what you're wanting to do. I can already tell. You're gonna want in those comment sections to be like, oh, Romania, here's the answers to your questions. And I'm gonna ask you to please be patient with me because I'm gonna ask a question that I'm sure is going to come out later on in the series, if not at the end of the series, and is going to be like one of those big questions. So I'm just going to ask you all to bear with me and sit on your hands, put your fists in your mouth, sit there and crack your knuckles and be like, Romania. But the big question is, like, is it possible that as you get older, you don't see yokai anymore? And I don't know about that because we've had like the monk, right? We've had the monk but he couldn't see the spirits either. He was just thinking that he could. And was just vaguely sensing them. So I don't know. That's a really good question. The closest series I have to this one that I am actively engaged in is Toilet Bound Hanako-kun, because it deals with yokai. That's like a big part of the series as well. In that series, and it kind of does the same motif that this one does, where to distinguish who humans are and who the yokai wear like the masks, or they wear a veil or something with a symbol on it to show you that they're not human. Hanako-kun does the same thing. But in that series, there are exorcists. So in that regard, the exorcists are often adults who can still see spirits. And I was assuming that this series was similar to Hanako-kun in that even adults that can't, if you're a kid and can see yokai, then as an adult you can see yokai. But apparently that's not the case. Apparently that's not the case. And we're going to talk about it, of what I think happens to possibly, like, I'm going to throw out some theories, and all I ask is just don't tell me the answers because my mods aren't going to let me read your comment. If you start giving me answers or be like, well, the theory is, the moderators are going to tell me not to read your comments. So unless you just want to put that on YouTube for other people to read, that's your own accord. If you want other people to read it on YouTube, then that's cool. But if you're expecting me to read it, it's just not going to happen, because I want the series to tell me, not you. So, but we'll find out as I watch. But basically, my theory is, I have 2 theories running right now about this. One is that, yeah, at a certain point in adulthood, you stop being able to see yokai and you kind of grow out of it, and then you just go on with your adult life like it didn't happen. And that could be, it very much seems like a Peter Pan sort of situation, because in the story Peter Pan, when you're a kid, you can go to Neverland and you see the Lost Boys and all that. And then once you grow up and become an adult, that part of your childhood, you've kind of lost that innocence. So you've lost the ability to go back to that time before you knew about adulthood. And as an adult, you just have to grow up without that anymore and move on to the next phase of your life. So I didn't know if maybe it was an idea of the yokai that you reach a certain point in a certain age and then you can't see the yokai anymore. And that's just a thing. But going back and thinking about it during the ED, I was kind of processing it after the ED right before I started this part of the video. I don't think that's the case. What I think it is that the yokai, as we know now, are often spirits that have been abandoned. They are spirits that have dealt with loss, with suffering. They're sad. They're angry. They're basically created from negative emotions that are associated with an animal or a person. And that creates the spirit that remains afterwards that haunts others, right? That's the whole point. But the thing about our dude here, Akafumi, And Hotaru is that Hotaru was this little lonely spirit that was by herself, and she befriended him, and he was ostracized and by himself, and they got to know each other and fell in love with one another. And the thing it is that when they finally filled that void, it's kind of like a ghost in Western storytelling. A ghost is there because it has unfinished business. And that's kind of like the yokai are created from negative emotions. But in Western culture, once the ghost finishes its business or has no unfinished business, it leaves. And with yokai, I'm wondering if once the yokai was no longer sad and once the human was no longer sad and didn't have this sense of loneliness and void in their heart, then they could no longer see. It was like they were cured, with a quotation marks around it. Like they no longer could see the yokai because they were no longer had those feelings of abandonment or suffering. Now, I don't know if that's the case. That's a hypothetical theory. He seemed really sad afterwards and mad and upset that he couldn't see her anymore. So you would wonder whether he would regress, but maybe it's one of those things where once you cross the threshold and you weren't upset anymore and she wasn't upset anymore, then that just suddenly was cut off. It's like, you're cured, you're both good, now go move on to your other lives and don't worry about it. I don't know if that's the case or not. I don't know why he suddenly one day woke up and couldn't see her. My only reasoning was that he got to a point where he wasn't sad anymore and the yokai and him no longer could connect because neither of them were similar in needing each other. I don't know. That's my theory. So I don't know if Reiko got to a point where she, one, grew up and no longer could see the yokai because of her age, or if she got to a point in her life where she met someone and fell in love with them and no longer needed to see the yokai, or she reached a point in her life where it just stopped happening and that's why she never came back. If she just stopped seeing the yokai or being able to see the yokai, it would make sense why she never went back to so many of these, why she didn't give the names back, why all of this. If she lost the ability to see the yokai, it would make so much sense of why all this is happening, why she never gave the names back, why she never went back to see any of them. It would give so much context if we knew that Reiko lost the ability to see the yokai, and that's why none of this was ever finished, and why Natsume is going back and finishing his grandmother's work. The frustrating part is there's a little cat spirit right in front of you that may have answers to these questions, and Natsume isn't asking him. Like, Madara is sitting there just like on his hands and knees being like, oh, you gonna ask me if I know anything about this? And he never does. And I'm like, Natsume, the first thing I would be doing when I found out that you could grow out of being able to see the yokai would be like, is that what happened to my grandma? And just see if that was the case, right? Maybe it's genetic, who knows? But I don't know. There's a lot of theories in my head over what this means. If it means that this episode definitely is setting up the foreshadowing that at some point Natsume is not going to be able to see the spirits anymore. Like, it's setting up the concept that he's going to reach a point where he isn't going to be able to see the spirits any longer. And what do we do with that? Now, Madara says that no matter what happens, he's still going to follow him until he gets his hands on that book. And I mean, if he's in the little cat spirit, if he's in the little lucky cat body and everybody else that can't see spirits can see him, then there's a very good chance that Natsume is still going to be able to see Madara, even if he can't see the others. But I don't know. This episode very much brought up the foreshadowing of Natsume may at one point stop seeing spirits. And what is he going to do about that? And so we're going to talk about that this episode. The rule of 8 did not let us down when it comes to this episode. I really liked Akafumi. He was talking about seeing the fireflies, and as he's getting ready to get married and everything, he wanted to see her like one last time. And the sad news is that she was there with him the whole time, like grabbing his shoulder, and he couldn't feel it. Ugh. I also like the idea that she comes across as this touchy-feely yokai that's like trying to like grab a hold and maybe possess Natsume. But then we find out that she's really just, that physical contact is to her a connection and a sign that you're friends, right? Even at the very end, I liked the scene where she was like hovering over him. And when Natsume opens his eyes and sees her like right above him, he's like, I know you loved Akafumi. I'm not him, so no shady business is going to be happening between you and me. And she's like, oh, no, I'm just telling you that I'm leaving. But if you think about it, there's a lot of fireflies where I live, and fireflies are just, they like cling to you. It's not that they're not trying to attack you. They just cling to you. That's like just bug behavior. So it could be that she just clinged to him in that moment, being like, hey, I'm leaving. And he's like, you're not going to violate me, right? And she's like, no, I'm going to peace out. And then he's like, oh shit, wait. So I'm glad that she actually ends up being super, super innocent, because I could see her character, if this were any other show, her character would be made out to be this like stalkerish, jealous female character. I could see that happening, but Natsume don't play around with those type of tropes. No. Instead, she's just clingy and wants a friend. And she's like, oh, you can see me. I like that as Natsume is running away, Madara is just like clinging onto the back of his shirt. That's hilarious. Although, on the one hand, Natsume nearly died falling off of that cliff. I was like, oh shit. But then Madara's just on his shoulder like, well, it's a good thing that yokai caught you. I'm like, he could have died. What are you doing? just let him go. So then, I'm sorry, it was really hard for me to focus during the scene where she's talking to Natsume and the sake scene, because the sound of Madara just like licking the little sake out of the cup was simultaneously the most disturbing and precious thing I've ever heard in my life. And I was just like, what kind of voice acting is this? What kind of noise is that? That's incredible. I was just completely floored. And she's like, well, he could see me a long time ago, and we were young, I'd speak to him often, and we were inseparable, but one day he suddenly ceased to be able to see me. Yeah, and it's almost like their hearts were healed, and he could no longer see her, and and they were both supposed to move on now that they were healed, and it just never really worked out. And I wish that he's like, so that happens, huh? And then again, Madara's not saying a word. And she's like, I heard he's getting married, and I would like to at least see him on that day. I like, again, she's not painted up as being like a jealous spirit. She just wants to see him off, and she loves him. So it's like in a non-sexual way, their love. It's just like they have this platonic love for each other, and she just wants the best for him. And that was made so clear when she saw him and his wife, and she was like, oh, good. He's not going to be alone anymore. And I was like, oh. Like, she could have been a homewrecker spirit. Instead, she was so sweet. Little, I like she didn't have a name at first. And so she's like, I'm a low-level yokai, so I don't have a name. So I didn't even think about that. I hadn't thought about the possibility either of some of these spirits being so low-ranked that they don't have names. And so they couldn't be in the Book of Friends because they don't have a name attached to them. I like how Madara wanted to call her Ramen because her hair looked like noodles. I liked that. And Kyo, she kept saying Kyo in his dreams, and so that's the name he gave her. But Akafumi called her Hotaru for fireflies, so he changed it back. And he's like, I'll stay with you till the day of the ceremony. I do like that she's this firefly, like she's a living, glowing firefly, and that he's just like, I can't sleep because she burns too bright. And then the idea of her, like, ruffling her hands through his hair, like, that's just her and Akafumi's, like, love language for that they care about you. Oh. Meanwhile, he had this dream someone that was calling out Kyo. And so then, I just love the image of Madara and her passed out on his bed with the sake bottle. Hilarious. I hope that sake bottle is spiritual and not real. And so his, like, distant cousin doesn't go upstairs to his room and is like, oh, Natsume's hitting the bottle again before school. I feel like it's the weekend, though, because I feel like he doesn't go to school. I feel like this whole story takes place over a weekend. And so then he's like, will I lose the ability to be able to see the yokai? So, I like at first he didn't want to talk to the man and bring up something from the past because it was probably going to be something that would be negative that he wouldn't want to remember, which is being able to see the spirits. But later when they finally do talk, it seems to him like it was just this fond memory and he didn't really hold any like grudges or hatred towards that ability from the past, right? Didn't seem like that was the case anymore. So then Madara tells this story. He tells this story that once, a long time ago, a mountain god in this area fell in love with a human woman, and they had many secret trysts together in the forest. And I was like, oh, is that like you and Reiko? Is that, are you fond of this story because you wanted to have secret trysts with Reiko's character when she grew up? I don't know. I still like the idea of Madara and Reiko as a ship. I know some people are probably like, no, they don't end up together. Let me ship, damn it. Let me find out for myself. Don't try to spoil me in the comments. So, and the fireflies of the swamp would light their way into the deep dark. It sounds so scandalous. Sounds like a fan fiction that's so scandalous. And then the god, to show his gratitude, he turned them from ephemeral fireflies into yokai. And the thing about it is that Madara kind of like warns the Kotaru about is that he's like, the fireflies, once they become yokai, you essentially live forever, right? Unless, I assume, you're exorcised. That one monk was trying to do it. Unless you're excised or a spirit kills you necessarily. You basically live forever, but as a bug, you know, your time on Earth is limited. What was really sad was, I feel like for her, the sign of her moving on was literally her passing, like turning back into a firefly and like living out the rest of her fleeting life, which this episode's called Fleeting Light, which, and then his was moving on and being able to like go into the next chapter of his life's journey. So it's like, it's fine. Everything's fine. So, in any case, we also see this. I like the foreshadowing with the little carp spirit that's in the lake. I like the foreshadowing that you have this carp spirit that looks like it's from Jujutsu Kaisen. And basically the idea that it doesn't bother people. But then Madara is such a bastard. He's just like, oh, yeah, so her becoming a firefly, like that carp spirit that we just briefly mentioned, he eats fireflies. And I'm like, you know, when she was talking about turning into a firefly spirit, Madara, you should probably have said, don't go back down to the lake because you might get eaten. How dare. I feel like it wouldn't be an episode unless Natsume is put out by either having his clothes ripped, soaked, or nearly caught on fire. And he's like, I can't say that I can see yokai because he's like, I don't want to bring up those bad things. And the sad part is that Natsume knows a lot of what, you know, Akafumi's talking about, but even Akafumi, who disliked yokai, he ended up falling in love with her and ended up respecting them. And I guess that's, you know, part of it. They finally accepted them and realized they weren't bad, and that's when he couldn't see them anymore. And so then Natsume has this conversation to himself, being like, for the longest time, I didn't want to see yokai. But over the last several episodes, he's been coming to realize that they're not all that bad, and they are kind of like him in a way. So I love the idea that he's like, I'm going to be sad if the day comes and I can't see them anymore, but I'm going to look back on all the memories of them and think of those fondly, which is he's drawing inspiration from Akafumi. So I like that. I would not be surprised if by the end of the story, Natsume doesn't see them anymore, but he has those memories, and that's the Book of Friends. That's the story, right? Interesting. I also wonder if the Book of Friends, if Reiko, one of the reasons why she never gave the names back is she got to see, not because she necessarily couldn't give them back, although that certainly could be part of it, but maybe she wanted to keep the Book of Friends to like help her remember the names and help her remember those spirits after she had not been able to talk to them anymore. She's like, well, I can't give them back anyway. I don't have the ability anymore, but also I want to keep these names in this book because I want to be able to remember them and who they were. I don't know. Again, this show's keeping Reiko very... Now that we've gotten to know that Reiko's his grandmother and we get the gist of her relationship with the yokai, she's now suddenly this very mysterious figure that we don't get a lot of focus on. And it's so sad. I like as Natsume walks up to talk with Akafumi about it, I like the idea that he's holding Madara, being like, we have to do this. We have to ask him about it. Why does he still go to the swamp as if he's looking for her? And then he's like, well, I had a bad history with them. He's like, but I loved her. And one day I completely lost the ability to see the yokai. And he's like, I couldn't bring myself to forget her, so I never married. But I like that he says, now I found somebody, a woman I could truly love at last. I like the idea of this guy having high standards. Look at him. He's like, I had high standards, this genuinely kind woman. That probably remind him of Hotaru in a little bit. And I like that he's like, I'm getting married in 3 days, and I just wanted to see her one more time. And after that, I won't come here anymore. It's like I said, it's going to be the closing of one chapter going into another. And just the idea that Hotaru, like, she decided to become a bug because she couldn't stand to live without him. And she was happy knowing he had someone. It seems like she only stuck around to make sure he had someone to care for him. I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. And there was a time where when the moment she like grabbed Natsume's hand and he had the dream, I was like, I wonder if Natsume was like thinking she was going to try to replace Akafumi with him for her. And he was like, look, that's not going to work. But oh my God. So the little dream that he has about them like becoming close, of Akafumi and her becoming close and having like the flower in her hair. It's very romantic. It's very cute. And then him like screaming out her name and her just standing there not being able to do anything. And he's like calling out and crying for her. Oh my God. The voice acting was so intense and so good. And it was just so sad. I was like, no, I wanted him to be able to see her, and just seeing him so anguished in the animation, like showing him just heartbroken. I was like, Sho, what are you doing? Oh, it was so sad. And then she just stood there like he couldn't see her. And then he kept going back to see her. And I love these like, do you hate me? And I like this action of her taking off the mask, because the mask seems to be like a way to identify the yokai as not human. But I like in this one moment, she takes off the mask and she like gives him this hug and like tells him that she loves him and like wraps her arm around him and like is there like holding him as she's like crying, telling him it's going to be okay. Oh, this scene where he wakes up, for a hot second, I was like, is this about to take a non-consensual sexual turn? Because she has like her hand in his and she's like over the top of him, like putting him in a very compromising position. And he's like, Hotaru, and I know she's hovering over him, but still it's the idea. He's like, I'm not Akafumi. I'm not the man that you love. And he's like, I saw and I heard. And she's like, I'm a firefly yokai. She's like, I don't have a physical form, but I'm able to turn back into a firefly just once. And then Madara's like, well, that's a dumb idea, because then you'll just turn it back into a bug. And she's like, I don't care. And I love the idea that the mask like breaks up and dissolves, showing that she's done being a yokai. She's like, even if I'm gone, he'll still smile for me. Oh, and Natsume, that look where he's just staring up at her. And she's like, so just for once more, even if I'm a firefly, I want to see him one last time. It's so sad. And then Madara's like, yeah, she might get eaten by that spirit. It's like, damn it. Damn it, Madara. I like that, you know, somehow Natsume always ends up in the water. Like, just ends up in the water, in a fire, in something. And I was doing good, y'all. I was doing okay. I was doing fine. And the moment he realized it was her and all the fireflies came out, and he realized that, like, she had been there watching over him. Nope. And he like holds her hand and like all the fireflies are there. Nope. And it's just like the end of one chapter ending the beginning of a different for each of them. And it's so sad because they loved each other and they can't be together, but they're both happy because they each are going on their own separate ways. Stop it. So then Natsume asks the mountain god and his lover, the couple the fireflies watch, did they end up happy? And Madara's like, I don't know. Madara gives us this beautiful little story, and it's like, what was the ending? He's like, I don't remember. He's like, damn Danny DeVito from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And he's like, unlike yokai, human lives are short. And then Natsume's like, will I one day lose my ability to see you all? Would it feel like freedom? Because that's the thing. I think for the first time, Natsume is thinking, you know, he's like, I've always wanted this for me not to be able to see them anymore. But if that ends up happening, am I really going to be happy? Or am I going to feel sad like that man and keep wanting to go back to this? It's almost like a life lesson of, hey, don't grow up too fast because you may end up regretting it. It's sort of like, yeah, as you're growing up and as you're a teenager, there's going to be things that happen to you and that you do that's going to ostracize you. There's going to be things that like make you feel like you're not connected to anybody, and there's going to be things that make you feel like you're singled out and you're isolated and alone. But one, you're not, and two, you don't want to take advantage of that youth and don't waste it or regret it, because then you'll look back and be like, I wish that I could have come back and had just one more moment of that to either do something for yourself or to savor something, or to change what you did. It's like, it's basically a big hashtag no regrets. If you're going by the same voice actor for Natsume, hashtag no regrets, it's essentially like, just, don't take advantage of, this time that seems like it's bad. Instead, make the most of it and make it into something positive, because you're going to look back on it and maybe want to go back to that moment. I just love it. He's like, at that moment, it seemed as though a single tiny firefly whispered something to me, but I couldn't understand the words. I wonder if he understands them. I wonder if he's the only one. Being like, is that man, the one that loved her, the only one that's going to understand her? Then we have this very Trigun-esque 1990s anime wedding, which is really super cute. And he's like, it hurts to see them and not be able to do anything. Yeah. You're not. And he's like, you're an idiot. And he's like, you're not obligated to help every single one of them. I like the idea that Natsume is like, it does hurt to be able to see all these spirits and not be able to help every single one. And Madara's like, well, nobody can do that. Like, don't be like that. And he's like, at the end of the day, the yokai and humans are different beings. But... And he's like, well, I'll tell you this, Natsume. Even if you stop seeing the yokai, I'm not letting go. Not letting you go until I get the Book of Friends. That seems like an end of story thing that's going to happen, right? Maybe the yokai will disappear from my sight someday. And I like he just picks up Madara and looks at him. But my memories of the time I've spent with them never will. I like that he just like looks up like, what? What are you looking at me for? He's like, then you'd better be a good bodyguard if I can't see them anymore. We promised. He's like, fine. Not a single one. I love that. He's like, I'm always gonna have my memories and not regret helping any of them. Yeah, so that definitely seems like there's some foreshadowing there, but we'll see if it all plays out in the end. We'll see, but episode was so sad. It's like, dang show. So I love this idea of Natsume kind of challenging his previous thoughts about the yokai and how he thought about them, and challenging what he's believed. It's very sweet. So in any case, I'm curious to know your thoughts down below of this particular episode. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, but I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Hope you didn't shed as much tears as I did, but I wouldn't be surprised if y'all did this episode. It was really sad, but I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Natsume Yujin-Cho or Natsume's Book of Friends.